Hello, everybody. My name is Jack McCullough. I am the founder and president of the CFO Leadership Council. Kind of sad today. This is the fifth and final session of the CFO Masterclass, but it's going to be a great one. I can't think of a better group of speakers to end this program with. Before we begin, I want to give a special thanks not only to MIT Sloan Executive Education, but because he's on the call, to Peter Hurst, who is its executive director. We were working jointly on CFO Week, which was to have taken place in May. And of course, the circumstances forced us to reschedule that. And Peter came and said, how can we help with your members? And what we did is we put together this masterclass, which has been a series of Fridays, phenomenal content and speakers. So Peter, thank you for your leadership in putting this program together.
Pleasure.
Cool. These are our 5 speakers. Rebecca, if you would like to move to the next slide. I have a few administrative things. Just by my own background, which is really dull, but as I said, I'm the founder and president of the CFO Leadership Council. I am also a graduate of MIT Sloan, which is the genesis of the partnership between our two organizations. And I'm the founder of the MIT Sloan CFO Summit. And recently, I became a senior contributor to Forbes CFO Network. Along the way, when I started the group, I was a CFO, and I served in that role for 26 different companies. A few administrative things. Your lines are muted, and that is by design. So a couple of things. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see a box for Q&A and a separate box for chat. Chat would be if you just want to make any conversations or reach out to people. You can do that. You can share your observations on the program. There's been a lot of activity on the prior 4. Q&A is if you specifically have questions for our speakers. Ash, who is our moderator, will be monitoring that, as will Jennifer and I. And so if you have questions, this is meant to be highly interactive. Ask them there. There's also Cpe Polling. During the course of this program, there will be 5 questions that will be visible on your screen. To earn CPE, if you need that, you will need to answer all 5 of the questions, as well as be on at the beginning and end of the program. They're pretty easy questions to answer. We have noticed some people tell us that they have difficulty answering them. It's not often, and there's no common denominator as to why. About 9 out of 10 people can solve the problem by exiting full screen mode during the course of answering the polling questions, and then once you've done so, go back. If you're the 1 in 10 that still doesn't work for, just tell the answer in the chat box, and Jennifer and I will make note of it. And that's that. Rebecca, if you'd like to go on to the next slide. I do want to thank the sponsors for this program and for the Academy. They're all listed there. We happen to have a few representatives from the sponsors today. I won't talk about them explicitly, but the point I'd like to make is they agreed to sponsor the conference in May. And when we had to cancel or reschedule to November, not one of these firms asked for their money back. They just said, don't worry about it. Let's just put together some good content from your members. So we are going to have that concert in November, but they've been financially supportive and supportive in every other way as we put this in the Academy together. So thank you for being great to work with, guys. And I mentioned the CFO Academy. It's been a great success. The final programs are next week, and we have a really good set of programs. For those who haven't been to the Academy, they're a little different than this. They're meant to be highly interactive, so there's only 10 to 25 people in a room, and we'll bring in one of our subject matter experts to talk about a topic that's of interest to the CFO community. But we encourage all of you to get involved in these. So registration is right on our website. Hopefully you can take in the last one. And okay, I'm going to turn it over to the speakers to introduce themselves. Ash is our moderator for today, and very instrumental in putting this conversation together. His bio's there. The only thing I'm going to say about Ash is he actually told me this. He's actually a former pilot, and he found that dull, so he decided to enter the accounting profession instead. A lot more excitement, a lot more fulfilling. I'm going to go on mute and hide myself. Ash, it's all yours.
Thank you. I am absolutely delighted to be here, and I just want to make sure we're all at ease, we're relaxed, because you know, we haven't done panels across webinars, across time zones, and it's quite challenging to try and get a panel discussion going with everybody being remote. So do bear with us if there are some slips and bumps and hold-ups, but I'm absolutely delighted to be speaking to these very knowledgeable panelists. There's a wealth of information there, so I'm looking forward to the discussion. I'm a former CFO. I used to be the CFO of a global multinational based out of the UK, a logistics company, which today is owned by FedEx. It was called TNT, and that's not Turner Network Television. I'm now involved in the design and delivery of the association's CGMA qualification, which is the Chartered Global Management Accounting qualification, which is really focused at folks such as yourselves and corporate finance folk who want to become more strategic. So that's what I currently do, and I'll hand you over to Jason to introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Jason Child, and I am currently CFO of Splunk, which is a large kind of data, data extraction and monitoring tool. I've been at Splunk for about a little over a year. Before that, I spent I spent 4 years at 2 different private companies as CFO of a company called Open Door, which was in the online real estate space. Before that, a company called Jawbone. And then before that, I was the CFO that took Groupon public, which was one of the early unicorns back in 2011, so it went public. And then before that, I spent about a dozen years or so at Amazon. And anyways, excited to be here and look forward to the discussion.
First, Rick, unmute yourself. Hello, everyone. I'm Peter Hurst. Thanks for the great opportunity to introduce myself, Ash. I'm, as was mentioned, at the MIT Sloan School, where I lead the executive education program. I, on this call, am not from a finance background. I've never been a CFO, although, as I like to joke, I do have a PhD in physics, so hopefully I'm at least a bit numerate. We are very happy to be partnering with this organization for this series and for CFO Week. And I'm happy to be able to hopefully bring some of my perspective from what we're hearing from companies that we work with, not only from the finance function, but obviously right across businesses, particularly around what the talent and skills and innovation requirements are. And I think maybe can help with some perspective. I run a $50 million business within MIT, and so maybe I can help with the perspective of a business manager, a business leader who relies very, very heavily on my finance team and finance colleagues. And so I'm here as a bit of a customer as well.
Peter, thank you, and thank you for being here. We'll go to Raul next. Welcome, Raul.
Thanks, Ash. Thank you. Hi, I'm Raul Vega. I'm the CEO of Oxus. We're a management consulting and outsourcing firm. Focus a lot on IT and BPO. I actually started my career, very traditional finance career. Started in audit at Pricewaterhouse. Quickly realized that wasn't going to be my path. Stayed there about 4 years, and I went to Pepsi International, which was a very different experience. And while I was there, my role and really my career changed. I got very operational, but I also got involved in the very beginnings of business process reengineering and led the first shared services for Pepsi outside the US in the 90s, early 90s, when no one was really doing this. Right now it'd be called the Finance Transformation Project. Back then we called it business process reengineering. And that really took me on a very different path. I left Pepsi in '97 and founded Oxus with several of the members that helped me with that initiative. And really we were focused and have been focused for the last 23 years on really helping mid-market and high growth companies build scalable back office operations. So I've kind of bring a unique perspective because I've been an advisor to some of the largest companies in the world on finance transformation. And I've also run a shared service center when I was at Pepsi, and now I run a outsourcing business as a third party. So looking forward to the discussion.
Raul, thank you. And your insights from your transformations across several industries is going to be extremely valuable too. Joel, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Super excited to talk to you guys. Great panel. Appreciate you making this venue available. So Joel Wilhite, CFO for Avid Exchange. Been with the company for about 3.5 years. We're headquartered in Charlotte with about 1,400 employees. We're a software company, and we automate the accounts payable process for middle market companies. And so put simply, and we'll talk more about this, we just eliminate the paper invoice, the paper check, taking sort of the cost, friction, and paper out of that particular workflow for middle market companies. I've spent the last 20 years at several other high growth software companies, building great teams, leading those businesses through growth and scale with a couple IPOs along the way. And back in the early days with KPMG, I was actually on the Pepsi account in Eastern Europe. So Raul, we probably share some more stories there, but great to be with you guys today.
Fantastic. Welcome, Joel. So what I want to do is just set up the discussion, go through a few slides, and what we're going to do is just use the setup as a backdrop for our discussion today. We have all been on a transformation journey. We have all achieved significant amount of transition, transformation, efficiency, and effectiveness. We've done all this. 15 years ago, we were talking about moving from scorekeeper to business partner. Today, to use an aviation analogy, we talk about moving from a navigator to a co-pilot. And that seems to be getting a lot of traction because a navigator just kind of reviews and monitors systems and performance, monitors whether the plane's tracking to course in terms of budgets and forecasts, make sure they've got enough fuel in terms of cash flow, etc., and make sure the captain and the co-pilot are actually taking the plane safely to the budgeted destination. And when you think about it, no longer in a cockpit do you have a navigator. You've now got cockpit automation, and everything the navigator does is at the tips of the fingers of the pilot and the co-pilot. So the navigator had to jump seats and learn to fly the plane and get a totally new skill set. And that's kind of what we're seeing with the automation in our area, the automation in the CFO's cockpit. So if you look at the role of finance, there are fundamentally two major pillars. There's governance, which is predominantly being met, a lot of focus on governance post Sarbanes-Oxley. And a survey that Gartner did in the S&P 500 showed that the governance gap today between what the business expected and what was being delivered is about 10%. So 90% delivery, great score. When they looked at business guidance, and that's around business decision-making, forecasting, planning, and that type of activity, allocation of resources, etc., the gap, and this is not what they met, the gap was 65%, which means about a third of what the business needed was being provided by the CFO. So you add in COVID and you add in the greater complexity and the uncertainty, that guidance gap will continue to grow unless we do something about it. But we have technology as a friend, and I really want to present technology and automation as an enabler, as something not to be challenged by, but something to embrace. And these experts today here are going to tell us exactly that. And how do we do that? What should we be doing? Because when you look at the role of finance, we assemble the information, we know exactly where to go to get the information, we analyze it, we produce some insights, and then we go and hand it over to our business partners and kind of finish our role there. And the further value-adding activity about really partnering with the business, collaborating with these individual decision makers, influencing the strategy of the organization, influencing the customer experience, actually being a part of the execution and becoming the architect of value. Those are the areas where value is really added. and where finance has the capability to fill that guidance gap. But there are several things that hold us back. And we want to talk about how technology and automation can help in really getting us focused on the right things. But technology and automation is not the only thing that's going to get us there. There are several competencies that are absolutely essential. And when you look at that red box, it's really about the automation opportunity. There's a significant amount of opportunity to automate that assembly of information, the extraction of information, the analysis, and even some of the insights. And the human skills, if you go to the next slide, please, when we talk about this shift from having a cost mindset and an efficiency mindset to then going on to really adding value, really participating in flying the business alongside the captain, being that co-pilot, making sure you've got all these other alternate destinations. As you find, COVID has suddenly said, you know, your original destination of budget 2020 is not valid anymore. So where are we going? Where can we safely get this business to? And really engaging in maneuvering, in changing altitude and changing course, and actually doing that with the pilot is where we start to add value. And that requires a different mindset. It requires some skills, and we want to talk about those skills as well as we go into this panel. Next slide, please. So when we look at the opportunities and the type of technologies available, we want to talk about that. There's a lot of talk around automation. Cognitive computing is all around the AI, the augmented intelligence that we can actually leverage. Having all your data in one repository in the cloud in a standardized format that enables the advanced analytics, really using the in-memory computing to make fast, predictable type decisions, deploying robotics, process robotics to automate as much as you can, and automation of AP, for example, that was just talked about, and the visualization, which allows you to very rapidly communicate key trends, drill down capability, etc., to the business. We are in various stages of adoption, and this was from the research that we did towards the end of 2018. So it's not that old, but you can see how cloud is pretty much pervasive. Everyone is thinking, having a cloud mindset. And this whole idea of having a digital mindset and a cloud mindset is kind of fundamental to adoption of these type of technologies. And we want to talk a little bit more about specific technologies and solutions as we go into the panel. Next slide, please. We also want to be absolutely transparent. Yes, the technologies are available, but as you can see here, when you compare the current state to the desired state, you can still see that almost a third of the time, 2/3 of the time is still spent on getting the data, assembling the data, trying to analyze the data. And only a third of the time is spent on the value adding activity. But adoption of technology is going to enable us. We know that, but how do we do that? How do we get there? Hopefully we'll have some answers from these experts today. Next slide, please. And then finally, what are the type of skill sets? And this is a subject that is really close to the association's heart. What we are trying to do is really equip our professionals, the finance professionals, with the right balance. It's not only technical skills, but it's those technical skills, but they are layered with the business people leadership skill set, with a digital skill set right at the center of it. And these skill sets, again, this resource was based on, it's a free resource, it's online. If you do a Google CGMA competency framework, you'll get a 64-page document that actually goes through the type of digital skills that you need to be thinking about on your team, the type of leadership and people skills that you need to have in order to drive change, in order to manage change, in order to really make the shift and transformation. So we'll touch on some of those skill sets as well. And so what we really want to do is look at how this skill set has inverted. You know, the old world was we really need to have a transactional approach, expert in transactions, minimize errors. It was very operational. And this analysis, influence, managing change, driving change, and really driving strategic imperatives in the business was when we got the time to do it. But as we go forward, there is much greater need in those advanced skill sets. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. And we'll talk about some of those skill sets and how you can develop them in your teams. So I just want to launch into the first question. And I know, Raul, you have seen how organizations are transforming and the kind of journeys they've taken and where they were and where they ought to be and how they've moved. What is it that you see that has companies entrenched in this 2/3 of the activity in assembling the information and trying to produce these reports and not really moving towards that right-hand zone? And I don't want those diagrams to be, for you to be thinking, if you could go back to that 4 boxes, please, Jennifer, that have that in the background. I don't want you to think about this as a linear and everybody fits into a box very nicely. It's iterative and people are at various stages of their evolution. But Raul, you had some real good insights as to what is holding companies back. And that will set us up to see what they should be doing. Can I ask you to jump in, Raul?
Sure, Ash, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's interesting when you started talking about scorekeeper and value-added finance. And I briefly mentioned my project at Pepsi in the 90s. That was exactly what we were trying to do. This is not a new concept. The whole concept of my initiative was, how do we create more? We were focused on Latin American business, and it was, how do we as finance drive more value to our business partners? And how do we go about doing that? And when we thought through that, it led to a lot of different things. One is technology was definitely a play, but it was also, what's our role and what's our business model of finance? And what I've seen, and I've now spent 23 years doing this, 25 years, it's the same issue today. I can go to any company that is dealing with this, and they're all struggling with the role of finance because it's a very traditional view, and it's a very accounting-centric, historical, backward-looking, the scorekeeper mentality. And with the speed of business just keeps accelerating and change keeps accelerating, and COVID's just the latest example of how nimble we need to be. Finance teams have been very stuck in a very traditional way. And what I've seen, and as a CEO and working with CEOs, what we want is a CFO who's helping me drive strategy and help implement it, not tell me what happened last month, 2 months ago, 3 months ago. To me, that's where the profession needs to change. So the prism of technology falls into that, right? So there's so much technology out there that it's overwhelming, all right? There's document management systems, analytics systems, ERPs. There's a million of them out there, right? The problem is implementing them right. But even before that, what is the business value you want, which gets down to you have a clear vision of finance. My belief is transaction processing, which has been at the core of finance forever, is what a lot of people see as their role. And that paradigm has to shift and realize that's not really my role. My role is really to be what I believe is an analytics powerhouse for the business and providing information out there. And if you change that prism, it changes really how you look at the entire business. But I think a lot of people believe the role of finance is transaction processing, and they haven't moved to these other areas. And that's why I think you see the profession changing a lot in terms of the skill set and types of folks coming into it. There's many CFOs who are telling me now, we'll get into it later, they're hiring industrial engineers, not CPAs. You know, but I think it's really the modern finance is a very different type of animal and needs to be than the old traditional one. And I think that's the biggest barrier to implementing technology and getting out of the 2/3 transaction process.
Yeah, and you know, just going to Jason, you've come from really these high-tech companies, leading edge type solutions. You were talking about how even, actually, Raul, you were talking about how even ERP is not fully implemented in many of the mid-sized companies that you've come across. So what should CFOs be doing, Jason? You've been through this journey. Could you give some insights as to where do we start and how do we take this forward?
Yeah, just one thing I didn't say in my background. Before I was at Amazon, I was actually at Anderson in the business process transformation team in 94 to 96. So it sounds like we all have similar backgrounds. Anyways, but when I joined Amazon in 99, you know, it was still, it was very, very manual. What was cool is our CFO at this point, when it just started becoming a bigger company, they hired CFOs from GE, and they were very much putting in kind of the process approach of the CFO is really not just the scorekeeper, but is actually also the person that really sees the allocation of capital as the primary role. And how do I make sure that I'm optimizing for the return on invested capital based on where I'm allocating it? And then how do you do that? You have reporting, which is table stakes, but then you try to figure out how to minimize the time reporting through automation and whatnot, and then actually spend your time on the analysis and on the business partnering. And so that was kind of foundational. And it's what was fascinating is after 12 years of being in a bunch of different roles across accounting and investor relations and different kind of operational CFO, kind of divisional CFO roles. What was interesting is the tools started getting dramatically better. And then when I joined Groupon in 2010, 11 timeframe, that's when the cloud was really starting to take off. And then Groupon was this company that now we were able to, probably in about a year or so, do what took 5 or 6 years for us to do in finance at Amazon, because we had all these great cloud products. And so the company was 2 years old when I joined. There was a finance team of about 20 people. We added, a couple hundred folks over the next, we had this crazy hire, we were the fastest growing company in history. That's a whole different story. That should be a different session on the cautionary tale of growing too fast. But what was funny in the old days was there was a lot of gravity around infrastructure and how fast you could grow, because of how fast could you hire people, how fast could you deploy servers, how fast could you actually support a website, and so on and so forth. And so with cloud, that all changed. And what was interesting is we then were able to quickly, implement NetSuite, which we had outgrown our Great Plains software, which was fine for the first billion. And then we started adding. I think we added 40 countries in 1 year, and we had to add all these currencies. We had to add, some of the foreign language capabilities as well. So we were able to deploy NetSuite, and we were able to do it in the cloud. So we didn't actually have to buy the hardware and then actually have to figure out how to hire people that knew how to, implement it. Instead, there's this cottage industry of folks that know how to implement all these various tools. And so what was cool is, it probably took me, maybe it was between 1 and 2 years to implement, all these various tools, most of them cloud-based. Then as I moved on to some smaller private companies, Jawbone and then Open Door, the tools continued to evolve even further. And so now we were able to do things in a couple months where all of a sudden I have NetSuite again. That's pretty quick to implement. I have Expensify or Coupa or Concur for expense management. I have everyone in the field taking pictures of their receipts and uploading them, so I'm not having to track all the paper. I'm having an outsourced team in India or Manila who's actually doing a lot of the processing. I'm using Blackline to do all of my, reconciliations. I can do that online in a collaborative environment. I don't actually have the people in front of me. Anyways, so then now as I've kind of advanced even now to the last couple years, I'm seeing all those things continue to grow. And now I'm automating things by using UiPath or RPA to actually start implementing, bots that can actually start doing repetitive tasks that I used to actually pay an outsourcer to do. I could do it even cheaper. I can actually get this really cool software, Celonis, which is process mining. You can just put it on any process and it will give you all of the constraints. And I could figure out across, a process like any procure to pay cycle or whatever, you could put the software on top of it. You can find out where all the bottlenecks exist. So all of a sudden I don't have to wait for people to complain. I can actually just go and I can actually just get reporting that tells me where I need to go spend my time on trying to make sure that we're unlocking whatever people, process, or technology constraint exists. So anyway, so I think these technologies, I think as Raul said, it's almost mind-numbing. There's so many, but in the old days, you had to hire a bunch of people to figure out how to do stuff manually and then figure out what to automate. Now, you probably have to figure out what is the right tool for the job, because the leverage I can get from a bunch of these tools is so high, but if I don't pick the right tool, it will really set me back. So I really have to be careful about how I pick the right tool. How do I pick the right, group or consultant or whatever to help me implement? And then how do I make sure that I implement it correctly? And when I do that, I can probably bypass a lot of the old reporting I used to have to do. And I can go straight to, having my Tableau dashboard for whatever presentation of whatever analytics. And I can move, very, very quickly, but I do have to make sure I design it well up front. So that's kind of the evolution of what I've seen over the last 10 plus years. And it's been exciting to see.
So Jason, when you talk about the journey and the type of tools and some of these tools you mentioned, again, many of us haven't used them or seen them, but the tool you mentioned about overlaying that on a process and it gives you the bottlenecks. What was the name of that again?
That one's called Celonis, Celonis, and it's it's process mining is what they call it. But effectively, yeah, you deploy the software. It actually gives you this great diagram, which usually will scare you because it will show that your process looks like spaghetti, and then you realize that it's actually not as well as you thought it maybe should have been. But anyways,
right. So let's say there's a company, one of the companies here. They're not really on a fully on the cloud on ERP. They're on an on-prem system, and they have various legacy customer CRM systems interfacing, for their revenue and billing, and they've got another HR system which is bespoke, specific for that industry. And where would you say we should first start? What is the first step one of these CFOs should take in terms of their journey towards the journey you described?
So one of the mentors that I had, the GE folks, they had this really great framework that was kind of the how we kind of organized our time and our thoughts and priorities. And at first it was controllership and compliance. As a CFO, you get a pass-fail. If you fail on something there, no matter how smart you are and how great you are at allocating capital, if there is a compliance issue, you're probably going to have some real issues. So that has to be the absolute base layer. Then second, it gets into this: how do you improve transparency and understanding across the business about how things are operating and where you need to focus. And then the last thing would be, how do you then actually partner with the business to actually drive the right outcome that you're looking for? Right. And that's kind of where we all want to get to. Yes. But so I think across those three, you have to start then, how do I make sure my compliance and controllership is tight to make sure that I get that pass? And so I would say certainly ERP is a key piece, finding the right, for us actually at Splunk, we've been on NetSuite. We're a few $1 billion, and we've outgrown it, and so we're now implementing SAP, their cloud product S/4HANA. So far, so good. There's ERPs are worse. Most consultants and CFOs go to die, but it's, so far it's been good. I think
maybe just to nuance the question, there's a question from Ginny about what if somebody is on QuickBooks, right? So what would you say, what should their next step be? Given QuickBooks will meet your compliance governance needs, what should they do?
I think it depends on the size of the company. I think QuickBooks will work great. Groupon was on QuickBooks, until, I don't know, for the first, maybe, I think it was $50 million or something of revenue, which is probably honestly a little big for QuickBooks. But I think, it's just the size of the company, and I haven't used QuickBooks recently. It may have come a long way.
It's on the cloud.
Yeah. I mean, most of these tools, a lot of these technologies get commoditized pretty quickly, and they all get better quickly, or you don't hear of them anymore. But I haven't used QuickBooks recently, but my view would be it's probably mostly based on the size of the company, the size of the team, and the number of folks who have interaction to it. because you will have control or compliance issues if you're pushing the tool beyond what it's actually capable of.
Right.
I personally am not an expert on the current capabilities, but I would, that's the first thing I would double check.
Right. So this question, just anyone pick this up. So if a company is on QuickBooks, they're on Paychex, Equinox, Avid Exchange, and now they want to move towards automation, and you talked about UiPath, and there's several different tools. Question open to any of the panelists. What should this company be looking at next?
I might jump in, and I know, Raul, you probably have some thoughts on this well, but just a quick soundbite or two from my perspective, and maybe just through the lens of an example. So we all, several weeks ago, went from life as we knew it to working from home. And so if you think about there's the ERP, there's the actual accounting system that you run, but if you click down a level, there's a number of business processes that feed into that, right? And so at Avid Exchange, what we found is the work from home, kind of the COVID, was a catalyst for middle market companies. That's our focus. So not really massive, enterprise, customers, and not super tiny ones. But what we noticed is, in the work from home environment, there was a huge catalyst to say, well, hang on a second, how do I fully work from home when this workflow process, sort of procure to pay, depends on paper? So in the middle market, it might be surprising, and hopefully, maybe this resonates with the folks on the call. You depend on paper, coming in on the front end, cutting checks on the back end. And so this sort of situation sort of accelerated for us the opportunity. And what I would say, just to add one more thing to that, is, one of your previous graphs showed the cloud is fairly mature, and Jason's points, sort of illustrate that. There's now an ecosystem of kind of great tools that meet various different needs. But one way to address some of the things that aren't as mature and less available in the middle market, like RPA and advanced analytics, you can actually think of consuming through a SaaS application. So in the case of Avid Exchange, we take care of the ingestion and the automation and the repetitive process associated with those invoices. We take that entirely out of the hands of the middle market company. They can see it digitally rendered in their SaaS application from wherever they log in, but they're not handling paper, and they don't have to be necessarily a deep-pocketed large company like Pepsi to invest in the innovation and figure out RPA themselves. They can do it through an application like Avid Exchange, and I'm sure there's others as well.
So I just wanted, the reason I'm spending a little time on this is I'm not sure whether you saw the polling results in terms of the gaps. This 54% of the companies here, 54% of the attendees are saying they have significant gaps considering the overall state of the finance technology. And so I'm sure this has helped in terms of, where should they begin? So the right-sized cloud-based platform for an ERP. I think that's a good place to begin. And then start to look at cloud-based SaaS tools. And I think it was Jason who was mentioning when we were talking last time as to how that whole process has been de-risked because you don't need these big implementation plans and partners, and so there is this capability that you can draw upon, which is on the provider's side. And when we look at the next polling question, and it's a good time as we progress to, okay, so you've achieved a level of automation, and I'm not sure whether we've actually given an adequate answer on RPA and tools around robotics. Maybe we could spend another couple of minutes on that, and then move to the polling question, which says the most kind of area where people need help. And I'm trying to scroll back to the results.
Ash, can I give you a little perspective on some of these? I think I can help address some of it.
Yeah.
One, I think even the focus on saying cloud systems is the wrong focus. Okay, it doesn't have to be a cloud system. Let's just start with that. Okay, I mean, that's just where it's hosted. And there is a lot of value, but as you get larger and more complex, a cloud system does not automatically mean it's going to be easy to implement. If you have a bunch of legacy, unintegrated, bad data environment, it's going to be a nightmare just as well. I think when it really comes to where to start, and going back to that QuickBooks question, QuickBooks may be able to scale if they have a very simple financial need in the back. Where they may fall apart is on the CRM side or logistics or other areas that plug into a back-end financial system. So the financial system, I don't think it typically will scale, but I have seen $100 million plus companies running QuickBooks, and it would surprise you. I think the reality becomes you need to have in finance, let's just take it within the finance world. People talk about digital finance and they put all these buzzwords, but at the end of the day, what is your vision for digital finance? What is it you're trying to achieve? What are your business drivers? Are you trying to get real-time reporting, touchless transaction processing, maybe one version of the truth, whatever it could be, right? But I would say if you're really looking to leverage automation, have some business principles to start with. One, I want to eliminate all manual processing, okay? I want to eliminate paper, all right? I don't want my people spending all their time compiling data from different systems, so I want to integrate data. If you define these principles to an end vision, then that will quickly tell you, right, if you don't have a core ERP, that'll be your first step. But to say you do, it'll help you prioritize what are the right initiatives so you can build an architecture and a vision to get you there. But it really starts with what are your goals and what are you trying to accomplish and the business pain you're having. I have a client right now that came on board that their business is booming they're in the e-commerce space. They sell outdoor apparel, and with the pandemic, guess what? Everybody's going hiking and doing all this stuff. So their business has boomed and their AP department fell apart. So what's the issue to them? They can't pay their vendors, they can't pay their distributors, and that means they don't get product to sell to all the customers who want it. Pretty big issue. Why? Well, they had issues before the pandemic. They were manual, they had people issues, so it blew it up. So their decision was, hey, we're gonna outsource this and you implement all the technology for it and I can manage my growth. That was very specific because that was the business pain that was driving them, right? But really the underlying pain was they had a bad AP process, bad invoicing, all that, which impacts the revenue process. So I think you gotta really take a business perspective of it first and then build an architecture, which I think paperless is a key one. Most finance departments are still swarmed with paper. And you're never gonna be a digital company if you're pushing paper all over.
And you know, COVID has really accelerated that need to be paperless as well. Many companies trying to get to touchless, pardon the pun, transactions, right? So, but let's Karen asking a question. We are 21 employees, 5 million in revenue. Do they have an opportunity to get in on that finance automation, which is going to be cost effective for them and which enables them to scale and grow? Anyone wants to jump in on that?
I mean, I would say for sure. I mean, that's really where cloud really is the play, right? I think when you're small, it's a great place to leverage these SaaS products before you get a lot of complexity and you build your business processes around best practices, which are usually embedded into these tools. When you're much bigger, your multi-billion-dollar business has done a lot of acquisitions, it's a lot harder. So if you can start early, I think it's definitely a play.
I totally agree. I would say, like, here's an example. At Groupon, we were using Coupa and it was great, but you know, it required some time to implement and it required some effort. I then moved to Opendoor, which was pretty small and it was growing quickly. And there we adopted Expensify, took a day, spent, you know, I mean, it was dramatically cheaper, didn't require any sort of implementation or I mean, it was just very, very simple and it works great. And we used that for a couple of years. And when I left, we were just finally starting to think, well, maybe now it's time to go look at a Coupa or a Concur. But for the size of company and for, you know, 100 employees or less, Expensify is great. And there's a whole bunch of tools that are honestly continuing to, I'm probably not the expert on what's the right tool because there's so many and they're coming so quickly. But as you think about how you would scale a function, what I said earlier, I think is becoming a bigger deal for me now, which is I really want to stop and spend some time getting the landscape of what tools exist. So go find the expert, you know, in your industry or whoever has a business that may be somewhat like yours, and try to go and find out who are the current tools that are solving whatever problem, because there are no shortage of them. And because of the fact that they're cloud-based, you could probably use a P card and get it going in minutes. And I think that sort of approach didn't exist 10 years ago. Kind of existed 5 years ago. Today it's everywhere. And so when I saw the poll question about gaps, I agree there's a lot of gaps. But when I look at our organization, I see the gaps are not because the technology doesn't exist. It's because I just haven't sat down and spent time trying to design or pick the right system to go implement it, because there is a solution for darn near every problem out there now. And there's, especially if you're smaller, there's a lot of low touch systems. And so I think it's about finding that person that can kind of help you with that process, and then having the CIO and maybe whoever can help make sure that you get the right help, either externally or internally, to adopt. Those are the two things that didn't used to become a key aspect for a CFO. It used to be more about my accountant, my auditor, and my technical support, whatever. It's now becoming, I think it's more on helping someone identify the right tools to get as much leverage as possible to reduce your people costs.
Thank you.
Just speaking as a kind of a business owner, going back to something Raul said, I thought was a really important point, and I think Jason was amplifying that you were talking in your comments about sort of the journey that the finance function is on, and getting to the point where finance can be a strategic partner to the business. But actually, a really important part of that is understanding what is the problem that the financial infrastructure and the finance function is helping us solve in our business. I mean, clearly people in the finance function have this laundry list of things that you need to do, and you need to work, and you need them to work well, and you want to create the platform that enables the business. But as a business owner, I can tell you that anytime, whichever function, whether it's finance or IT or HR, has a system that gets in the way of my ability to drive innovation and to drive value for customers and to create the platforms for actually generating cash in the business, that's actually a really primary problem. And so I'd really encourage that thinking in this sort of array of different technologies and projects, and and where do you start? I think really understanding what is the way. I was interested in the polling question we just asked, was a 5-year time horizon. How many of us in business owners are really dealing with 5-year planning horizons at the moment? There's a real opportunity for a disconnect there.
Yeah, absolutely.
3 years would be really long.
I wanted to circle back on a couple of comments and questions as well, and I want to just give a heads up. What we want to move towards is most people surveyed here are saying forecasting, planning, and analysis is the area of the greatest gap. 60% of them are saying that forecasting, planning, and analysis is an area where we need to focus on. So we'll move to that soon. But I just want to also address a couple of questions around the large organizations. I made a comment that it's you can outsource the implementation, and that was really around the capability of smaller units, smaller companies, small, medium-sized enterprises to be able to do that. And there was a challenge, as in the implementation of larger ERP systems, etc. Still require a large implementation team, and I totally agree. But here's where the difference is. When I implemented SAP R3 in the early 2000s, it took us 18 months to roll out a on-prem version by country, and we had to roll it out over around 50 countries. And it took us 18 months. By the time we got to the end of the implementation, R3 had updates, and we were way behind in our versions, etc. But today, all this happens even without you guys knowing it, in terms of the updates to the systems, and the speed of implementation today is much faster. Yes, you still need an implementation team for a large for a large implementation. No getting away from that. But what has also happened is the providers such as SAP and Oracle, etc. They've actually incorporated best practice into the way you need to lift and drop your processes, And you need to re-engineer the processes. Raul mentioned something about why are you adopting technology? There are organizations who take their old legacy process and then slap it on and try to retain that process in new technology. And it really is, you know, you're moving into a brand spanking new house with all your old furniture. And it really makes living very difficult. Whereas it's a move-in attitude one needs to take. I don't know if one of you wants to jump on that and just build upon, for the larger enterprises, the challenge really is to address the business need and re-engineer before you even start looking at adoption of these new technologies. Anyone want to comment on that before we move on?
I'll comment on that. I mean, I do a lot in that space, and that's 100% correct. Now, I don't think it necessarily applies only to big companies. Big companies just have a lot more complexity on it. Systems work based on good processes and good data. All right. And one of the challenges of relying on more advanced systems is there's a lot more data that you need in those systems for them to answer all those questions that you may not even have. Or the data is really dirty or it's not clean, and that's extrapolated in a large organization. So I think the big mistake, and you got to it, that a lot of people make is, yes, they want to take their old system, their old processes, and just apply it and automate it, right? That dog usually doesn't hunt. That doesn't get very far. You're still going to have a mess and you customize. So you need to think through, and I think it's also important that you don't just do everything that everybody else does, because then you really could lose competitive advantage. So what I see happening more effectively is, what are the stuff that's just very standard, accounts payable, invoice processing, pretty standard. It's not going to give me a competitive advantage. Take what the system provides. Change your process. Do it their way. That's going to be 80% of the processes out there. Now, there's going to be a 20% that's really the secret sauce to your business, or maybe it's how you do demand planning. Maybe it's certain things that you do, where in those cases, you still may want to even do custom development. One of the things we've seen is much more of a boom in custom development, but not around very standard processes, but around the unique stuff that makes you who you are, right? Maybe it's certain algorithms, maybe it's certain ways you look at consumers. And that's where you spend and customize, but the stuff that's generic, that doesn't really make you any difference commercially, from a commercial perspective. And I think that's the key question a lot of people don't ask themselves. What makes me, give me commercial differentiation, commercial value? Everything else, I can standardize. And that tries to the processes, and people don't think of it that way. They think of it as, this is the way we've always done it, and we want to do it again.
Right.
I can provide maybe a little bit of a proof point. So we're 6 months into our SAP S/4HANA implementation. I did exactly what Raul suggested. When we started the project, one of my audit committee members was the CIO at Cardinal Health. They did 3 ERP implementations across their company, spending $250 million in implementation costs. So when I told her we were going to do it in 12 months and we're going to spend $10 million, she absolutely laughed at me and said we were crazy. And what we did, and right now we're on track. It's on track to be done in 12 months. And we're $3 or $4 billion in billings company with 40 countries and a lot of complexity. We are basically customizing our interface with Zuora, which is our RevRec and revenue capture, sales tool, which is very, we have very complicated 606 unique aspects that we have to do a lot of customization. That is 80% of the project. 20% is we're taking everything else and we're just doing what they call fit to standard, or I am not going to modify SAP around procurement, around AP, around any of that other stuff, because as much as people don't want to change the process, they actually should. And the way they did it around NetSuite is not best in class anyways. And so I said, great, guess what? Everyone gets to learn this new system and everyone can do it, and we're going to do it. And so far it's working great. And we'll initially we'll save halfway through. So, but we've already gone through a number of hurdles, and we'll probably save, 3 or 4x on consulting costs. We'll create some pain, but we will have a better outcome because we're doing exactly what Raul said, which is just focus on what's unique about your business, and then don't let the people complaining about change drive the rest of the process. Otherwise, it'll cost you too much money, and the consultants will certainly stay and do the work and charge you accordingly. But anyways.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah. So if we switch gears and move on towards the forecasting, planning, and analysis, and I think that need has been heightened again because of the on-demand type forecasting need that we see today. We in this uncertain, complex world that we're living in, businesses are having to forecast on demand. How do we start to move towards an environment where we can start to talk about those value creating activities? And I was with the CFO of Microsoft a couple of months ago, who they've automated their forecasting process. And what he said to me was, Ash, there's no value created in saying, here's your forecast. It's what you do with that forecast then is what is going to create the value, right? So we want to get to that stage where we are able to provide forecasting on demand, et cetera, et cetera. But how do you get there? What are the steps? 60% of the audience are saying we need help in our planning forecasting process. How do we get there?
There's so many dimensions of that. You know, there's the walk before you run, and then there's the, you know, sort of, because I think I've got some sort of table stakes thoughts and curious what the panel thinks about it. But then, you know, which includes things like, you know, get out of Excel, you know, get into collaborative tools. Adaptive Insights is great. I've brought that into a few companies. Host Analytics is great. You guys have all seen these tools. Really, really great ways to collaborate. But it's only as good as the data. And so you've got to get the data right. And so if you think about, like, if you have the right data and you really understand the unit economics of your business, you can build, you know, regressions, which goes a little bit to the talent conversation we'll have in a minute. But you can really get the data to help inform what might be predicted. But right, the real value is, how do you move that, right? If history says this is what the future is going to be, it really takes kind of some thoughtful, analytical humans around that to really sort of drive. But if I think about the middle market and I think about our audience, I think, you know, maybe many of the folks on the webcast today are thinking about how to go from, all I've got is an ERP plus Excel. You know, I'd really encourage a couple of tools. Again, Adaptive, Host Analytics. There's some great tools out there that can help you get started.
Nash, I think the challenge is actually bigger and more immediate than the way you framed it, even, which is quite alarming, I think, for many of us. We've seen in the last 3 months, forecasting isn't about a single number. You know, we're really looking at enormous uncertainty, and, you know, how do we understand and present what the different range of scenarios are? And I think in the finance function, you know, you're kind of getting that from both ends. On the one hand, if you ask me as a business owner for what's my forecast to put into your forecast, I can't give you a single number anymore. And then, you know, by the same token, what does the board need to make any decisions? A single number is not going to help them very much either.
I never said single number, by the way.
That's true, you didn't. To be fair, you did not. I agree. But, you know, I think that's just, nevertheless, in many organizations, we've been able to do that in the past, right? And I think that's now something which the levels of uncertainty that we've seen in the last 3 months, I mean, if that's the new normal, if there's already not enough pressure on all of you CFOs to figure out how to get there now, you know, I think this is the moment that, you know, that 5 years is not an option of how long it takes to implement the ability to do that.
Absolutely.
I agree with what you're saying, Peter. To me, this is what the future of finance really is. It's not this transaction processing garbage and controls and governance. That, you know, that's, I think Jason said it was table stakes, right? But it's really the axis of strategy, data, and digital transformation, right? If you really think of that as your perspective and of what I bring to the table as a CFO and controller into the business. And it starts with the stuff we said. I'm not going to give you a great forecast if all the data coming in from AP and AR, it's all not integrated and it goes not into a real database, or it's Excel based. Everybody's using Excel and they don't have it in an integrated database. So to foundationally impact planning, you have to have integrated transactional systems, eliminate the paper, and have good data. The minute you do that, you have fixed a lot of the battle. You can just throw Power BI or Tableau over that and push it out. Now that's going to be real-time data, but real-time data, you have to have integrated data underneath it. So it's the foundation of your house. If the foundation is broken, you're dead. You're not putting a second floor on. So you got to fix that. Then I think there are quick hits for data visualization tools, and I call it democratizing the data. The problem is most finance departments control all the data. They're like the gatekeeper of all the data. Unleash the data is what I say. Let the business users have the data. Let the sales guys know. It may not be perfect. CFOs are very concerned because the data doesn't match and tie. It's the noise in the numbers. And everybody talks about the noise in the numbers and they throw out the analysis. Push out the data to the business users. And then what you got to think, to the point Peter's getting at, there's historical mindset. What happened? Why did it happen? But you want to move to the future mindset. What's going to happen and how do we make it happen? That requires even another level of data integration, which is third-party external data, okay? I have a client of mine who spends billions and billions of dollars in marketing. They cannot tell you if that had the effective lift on sales or not. They're blind. They just throw money at the problem. Well, as things start getting harder, you want to really allocate the capital. You got to get into marketing effectiveness, spend analytics, how that ties to your Nielsen data, all these external data forces. That to me is where finance really is the role of finance. And yeah, I got to do all the transaction processing, but having clean, good data and getting to a predictive mindset. And it's very hard, don't get me wrong, but you start with the transactions being all integrated. That's what you want to get out of that business, like we've been talking about. And that's not really your focus.
Yeah, Raul, you talk about democratization of data, give it out. Actually, it's already out. CFO used to have arms around all the data, but if you really look at CRM, Salesforce, for example, the type of analytics that the sales team are doing and the type of forecasting that the sales team are doing is actually superior to what the CFO's office is producing with spreadsheets. So you actually, if you try to think and be precious about your data and your trends and your spreadsheets, the business is actually ahead of you. So to incorporate HRM, CRM, so you look at human resource management and the whole workforce planning, HR actually has a much better view of what your human cost element would be than the CFO. And then now is how do you bring this all together and actually leverage that rich data? And you're absolutely spot on, Raul. If you don't have that foundation of one view of the truth and standardized data across the enterprise, I think that really is the starting point. And I think Jason's dying to get in there because he's got data to everything platform behind him.
Yeah, I completely agree with Raul. I would say that, at a couple companies that I've been at, they are way too many smart people focused on, like, to me, the bane of the CFO today for a larger company is the Biz Ops function. Because Biz Ops are people that are all out in the business focusing more on operational data than financial data, but a lot of times they're blending things. And unless you have the single source of truth or some sort of a data governance approach, they are defining customers different. They're attributing things all over the place. And it's absolutely a massive source of waste, in that you then start to have all these meetings and the CEO thought one thing because the marketing person told him this, and then the CFO says, I'm sorry, your return on investment in marketing is actually about half of what that person told you. And so it's funny, at Amazon, Bezos required every business leader to have their finance leader join every meeting, because he said, no offense, every one of my directs wants to tell me their area is going incredibly well and they're awesome. And then meanwhile, the finance person who reports to the CFO, they only get paid if they tell the truth. And so whenever they would talk about how great something was going, he would turn to the finance person and say, okay, that number right? You sure? And so then pretty soon it also helped improve the integration of finance into the business. But so I do think it's really important, though, on this notion of creating the single source of truth. And so how do you do that? There's a couple of key pieces. I think there's really defining data up front, having a cross-functional data council or whatever you want to call it. I'm not a huge fan of committees or councils, but if you have, you do need to have someone from the IT or CIO organization who owns the infrastructure. You need to have someone from finance who owns making sure the definitions of anything that makes it externally has to be, very rigorously vetted. And then of course, some of the operational and upstream data, at least just make sure that you come to core agreements definitionally about what they actually mean, because the amount of waste and churn you can create in a company can be massive. And so it depends on the size of the company, but for me, that's usually been always one of my biggest battles at Groupon, Amazon, and I'd say Splunk. That's a huge battle. Smaller companies, not as much so, but that's a key thing to make sure you get right.
So one version of the truth, standardized data. Any other insights into how to get there?
Our marketing pitch on data, everything. Basically, what Splunk, Splunk, I would say what Splunk does is it can do a lot of stuff, but the one thing I talk with our CTO a lot about is having the right tool for the job is so much more important than having to listen to a salesperson explain to you how the tool can do everything. And so, for example, I was actually looking at how we can assimilate extremely large data sets pretty much better than anyone. That's what Splunk does. So if you're a smaller company, you're probably not going to use Splunk. It's going to be too expensive. It's going to do way more than you need it to do. So you're probably better off with a different tool. And so, for example, we were looking at creating a much more robust data warehouse. And I went to the CTO, and the CTO said, "Yeah, we can do it. But you know how much time it's going to take? It's a waste of time. I'm going to." We looked at Redshift, which was not that great. Then we went to Snowflake. Snowflake's great, and it's way cheaper. So we basically were able to do something within about 2 weeks on Snowflake that would have taken us probably 3 months on Splunk or a couple months on Redshift. And the price was actually less. So I think being able to figure out what the right tool for the job is so critical. And that's where, honestly, you can Google most of the stuff and you can see opinions on, who's got it, and everything is evolving and changing so quickly. You're probably better off not listening to someone's opinion who did it 2 years ago. You need to talk to someone who's done it in a couple months.
Yeah, Raul seems like he is doing it now with his clients. Any insights from you, Raul, as to how?
Yeah, it gets to the point we were talking about. If you really want to speed up your forecasting and analysis, you have to have digital data to do that, right? So part of the problem is there's a lot of people in every organization spending all their time keying data from one system to another system, and it's not. So look at your business and say, okay, how do I digitize this data, right? That's really critical. That's a great place to start. And if you take that mindset, then you're going to see, wow, I gotta change this process. I gotta change that. I gotta do all these things. Then you get it into a central place where it's clean. And from that, the data visualization is so easy. It's unbelievable, the power. So I think as a finance group, you guys need to go to rehab and realize, I got to get off the Excel addiction. It's not doing me any good. Excel is a major problem to having great forecasting if you're going to do it enterprise-wide. Right? That to me is probably the biggest stumbling block. We implemented Power BI and we've done Tableau. Power BI comes free for most people if you're a Microsoft shop. You already own it. You can throw that on there and you would be amazed at the things that your teams, the Power Excel users can do. But they need the data. They need the data.
The only thing I'd add to that, Ash, and again, I don't want to steal the thunder from talent discussion, but it is sort of challenging to get a bunch of CPAs who are trained in scorekeeping to use data to look around corners. And I think Peter may have mentioned a physics background. I heard someone else mention industrial engineering, chemical engineering, industrial engineering, physics, and those sorts of backgrounds, in my experience, and I know because I built a few teams with these folks sprinkled in, really make super insightful forecasting engines. Speaking from a CPA Big Four trained type, too many of us is gonna force an out of balance skill set. So I agree with everything that we've said. Good data. I love the Bezos comment about business finance partnership. but really thinking about, and even if you're a small, mid-sized organization, having one person, not necessarily an accountant, that isn't necessarily the skill that we're talking about in terms of good data analytics.
100%.
Yeah, the conversation is surely moving towards skills, and there are a few questions that that are being posed around skills. So we talked about, okay, you get your analytics, get your forecasting, get this muscle, the digital intelligence built up, and then once you have this capability, you really are now in a position where you're reimagining your customer experience, your business model, you kind of going into that realm of business strategy. And so, Joel, we wanted to start to talk about talent, and you know, it is a significant issue. We want to talk about the availability of talent for the middle market organizations, but also some of the specific type of skills that are required. And I'll bring back our competency framework into that discussion. But Joel, if you want to kick us off on talent and the issue of talent that we should be keeping in mind with regards to the right skill sets.
Sure. I mean, it's a lot of what, you know, we've said throughout the conversation, and what I, you know, kind of just mentioned. I was poking around before the webcast and found a Deloitte study that talked about, on this topic, you're sort of hiring for a different personality, which I thought was an interesting way to go about it. So the sort of dimensions of talent on that particular study included the leading sort of factor, commercial acumen, decision making, you know, even above analytical ability. And someone, you know, a challenger, you know, negotiating, influence, strategic thinking. These are the tops of the list. And in the top 5, there's also analytic skills, relationship management. You know, in the top 5, you didn't have anything that was about technical accounting. And in my experience, to be honest, that, you know, smart folks can figure that stuff out pretty quick. It's the harder work is really, you know, partnering with the business, having that commercial acumen. And, you know, that's not easy. You know, that's not necessarily easy. I think there's a transformation of the CFO's office that's required. And again, we're talking about starting by freeing up scarce resources by automation, but what do you know, how do you make that shift? And I think for folks in that journey, starting now, thinking about how do what that next staff level person, maybe they are a former salesperson who have a statistics undergrad, right? Maybe they're smart, numerate people who understand how to influence and understand sort of the commercial end of the business, more so than necessarily the record keeping.
Yeah, Peter, I just wanted to go back to you, and we'll come back to the talent equation as well, because they're both so interlinked. And we were talking about, you know, the higher level value adding type activity with regards to engaging with the business model, looking at the business strategy, looking at being value adding at that level. You had a few thoughts to share.
Sure. I think also what Joel was saying, and I think it's come out in other comments as well, is, you know, I think it can be very valuable thinking about making use of the talent pipeline that exists across the business. I think is a good place to look. I mean, think about what it takes to find and retain great people in any role in the business. That's the biggest challenge that all business leaders and all functional leaders are facing right now. I think if there are people in commercial parts of your business or in other support functions, you know, HR or IT, I think there's a lot of opportunity for cross-pollination and development and training and bringing people in who actually, they already are part of the culture of the company. And I get the point that sometimes the culture might feel like it's the problem because that's how we used to do things rather than how we want to do things in the future. But I do think that, you know, we can think with blinders on very often and just think that, you know, we're developing the people within our part of the business, and, you know, the people who follow us should look like us. And I think that's definitely, that's both a challenge in terms of thinking about the diversity of thinking that we need to be able to drive innovation across every aspect of the business. But it's also a problem because frankly, that's limiting the supply of people who have the skills and the talent that we need. Yeah. Another aspect of that, I think, which I'm curious about, and we spend quite a lot of time in our executive education program actually helping people who are not finance people and probably don't want to be finance people actually build their, build enough finance literacy so actually the conversation that you want to happen can actually happen in a meaningful way. So I think there's a, on the talent development side, there are really things that, that the CFO could be helping drive with that, about building finance literacy, essentially, across the whole business. I think without it, that's actually, especially as a couple of the other panelists were saying, that now that the data is kind of free and everybody's got it, and they're doing what they want with it. Doing that in a context where people don't really understand, have that finance literacy is part of the problem as well, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely, really well said. I just want to go to Raul as a CEO who has expectations from a CFO. What advice would you give the CFOs in terms of the type of talent, skills that they should be bringing on board at this point in time, Raul?
It's a few things. I mean, one, I think what I want from my CFO is someone's in the trenches with me, not judging the results afterwards. That I really have zero patience and tolerance for that. So how are we going to hit a number and help me figure out how to hit the number? And the reality is, I think you definitely need a mix of skills. Like, I don't think we should minimize. You do need strong accounting skills. You do need those things. You need that knowledge.
Right.
And I think that's foundational. And the problem with a lot of people that don't have that background is they could be pretty weak with numbers, And at the end of the day, you better be number savvy in finance. So you got to balance those two things out, right? So to me, I would look at how do we embed more of a commercial thinking and knowledge into my finance teams. And I agree, maybe the controllership types are harder to get there. They need to be trained and coached, embed them in the business more. I think there's a tendency to be afraid to be wrong, so they don't take the risk. Whereas we on the business side, we're always wrong. We're shooting for something new, and if we don't get there, we'll figure it out. Finance people tend to be a little bit more cautious. So you got to change the culture. And I would also strongly encourage, let's focus our skills in certain core areas and not try to do everything in-house. And I think this is a major problem in finance organizations. And I've heard this for years. I think it's changing because of the pandemic, because they were forced to, but they wanted their AP person right down the hall. They wanted their AR person over here. Everybody had to be near me. That's a very finance-centric mentality, all right? Salespeople are everywhere. IT people work everywhere. Finance always wanted everybody close by. And what it really gets into a bigger issue is having a collaborative ecosystem is what I think you need to build in a finance function. And those experts could get a paycheck from our company, or they could be partners that this is what they do and they bring that to us. Staffing doesn't mean they need to all have a W-2. And I think that's a really tough concept for a lot of controllers and CFOs. But if you kind of free yourself of that mind, I don't need to invest training. I don't need to invest development in all these areas. I can leverage a partner, and then I could focus on developing my team on what's really important to me. And that to me is where I would like most CFOs to think more about that.
Yeah, there is a comment in the question saying, there seems to be Karen from Canada, I think. Thanks for joining us. There's a big emphasis today on IT, data skills for finance professionals. But on the flip side, what she has seen is in a well-automated environment, finance folk are not fully aware of some of the impacts of business decisions. They might give the wrong advice on FX or interest rate implications, or balance sheet versus P&L or cash flow, etc. How do we address this? So I think, Raul, you hit the nail on the head. It is that balance of having those skill sets, and if we go back to the competency framework, you'll see it's technical skills plus. It's not bereft of technical skills. There are many data jockeys who are able to do magic with data, get data extracted out of various systems, put them into a place where you can easily analyze, etc. But the business implications and the accounting implications, the audit implications, one needs to be able to layer those types of skills on the commercial acumen, the business acumen. And so for a future finance professional who is going to be really effective in this new world, the digital skill sets and the technology skill sets form a part of what was required. So it is in addition to, it's not about really, knowing all your rules around accounting, because now that can be automated. Anything that's predictable, anything that's repeatable is automated. You don't have value because you remember the depreciation rates and tax rates in your head, right? That doesn't cut any mustard anymore. So just want to go to Jason. You've been on this journey for a while, and you've seen some successes. If you could give us some insights into what type of skills do you want to develop within your team? What are these key skill sets that you'd like to have right next to you?
So I would say I am, this sounds trendy, but I'm a huge fan of diversity. and I always like to say I want all diversity. I want gender, I want race, I also want skills, I want education, I want degree diversity. There's certain roles I have to have a specialist in. So in tax, in technical accounting, those are specialist roles that I'm not, they're the experience, and it's a very different role than some of the FP&A roles can be much more athletes, where they're, I've had some really strong FP&A people that were physics and engineering backgrounds. They were not finance. They're just curious, sharp people that just knew how to say, something that, this is interesting. I don't know what's going on here. And they just had that natural curiosity and had a maybe slightly more open mindset. And the reality is I need them both. And, and then I also have had, I don't need this anymore. One thing that's great is at Amazon, the most important person in finance in the early days was an MIT engineer that we pulled over from the engineering team, who basically just became the data expert, and all the great analysis we ever did, the whole Prime program, it took us forever to figure out how to make that thing work. And it was this MIT engineer that actually helped do all that extraction to figure out how to truly calculate what the true value of Prime was. But so nowadays you can get that through, I think, a lot of these tools. But so from my perspective, I want diversity of thinking, of approach. To me, the technology, what it does is it helps you get leverage on what you used to have more bodies to help you get some of the reporting and get some of the basic stuff done. I think of technology as helping with that, but I don't think it replaces, the foundational skills and curiosity and questioning and skepticism. I expect some pretty healthy skepticism in the internal audit function. I expect probably more creativity, maybe a little, and more optimism in maybe the FP&A team who's supporting marketing and has to buy into what those guys are doing, because I'm already naturally skeptical. And so, so I'm always trying to figure out, how do I make sure that I have the right healthy tension to make sure that we're questioning ourselves, we're questioning the numbers. I've seen a lot of issues where, public and private, where you find some huge problem and now you have to figure out how to fix it. That every company I've been at has it. Some companies have done a better job of doing it private, behind the scenes versus publicly, but it takes diversity of, I think, background, diversity of thought, approach, and it takes an open mindset to be willing to not do groupthink and not all act the same way and whatnot. And that's one of the things I saw work really well at Amazon. One of the things that I've tried to continue to employ.
Thank you, Jason. Really, absolutely spot on. Joel, anything to add on the skills and talents?
No, I would just, reinforce what's already been said. And Peter, one of you guys mentioned the, looking inside the business, right? You're going to get, like, if you get good commercial acumen, at the same time, you get someone who understands your business. So I'm a big fan that once you're large enough to sort of have a critical mass and shift some talent around, I think there's a lot of benefit from bringing, a data person into an FP&A role, or an FP&A role into an ops role. I think, balancing and moving that talent around is key as well.
Yeah. a mix of skills is obviously quite critical. You can't just have one type, and so diversity. Jason, point really well made. The person who heads up Verizon's analytics is a CPA, and but he only became a CPA after he was 50. So he had all the business knowledge and the business skills. And he said, you know what, I have all this knowledge, but I just need to get some rigor in my understanding of accounting, tax, etc. So he undertook that after he was 50. So, you know, hats off to him. But
Hope for me yet.
what he was saying was, the ideal person I go to is someone who has both. And if somebody has that technical automation, IT type skill set, has a natural curiosity to see what those numbers actually mean in the business, and also has the technical training, he's my ideal. He has a team of 80 analysts. He's got data scientists, he's got engineers, he's got CPAs, and a mixed bunch. And those 80 do all the analytics in Verizon. It's one, you know, I don't think we can have one person who can actually meet all the needs, but there is this move, and there is an imperative that all finance professionals have a level of understanding of the technology world, the digital world, in order to continue to remain relevant. Which is why in our competency framework, we've actually identified 6 key digital skill sets that are required at various levels, and it's how much of this, you know, we are not trying to make finance to be a data engineer or to be a data scientist, but they need to know enough about data science and data engineer to understand the art of the possible, to really be able to engage in this world that we live in today. I want to bring this down to a close. I think we are closing this down at 1:30. Jack, am I correct?
Yeah, that's why I made myself visible. Yeah.
Okay. Very good.
I hated to do it. That was, I mean, this has been just fantastic. You guys are busy. Otherwise, I would have said we should do this as a 2-hour thing. But great content. I'm going to shut up now so you can wrap up.
Oh yeah, no, I thought perhaps you had something to say as we wrap up, but the insights and the feedback have been absolutely invaluable. I wasn't tracking with everything you said, so I'm going to listen to you all again, because I'm pretty sure I've missed some of the things. I think, Raul, there was a question on what tool you were talking about, which was for free, and I think that was Power BI.
Power BI.
If you have Microsoft Office and stuff, it's included in there.
Yeah.
And it's a great place to start and very powerful.
Right. Just closing, 30 seconds from each of you to just leave with the audience, and we'll shut down after that. We'll start with Raul. And
thanks, Ash, and everybody else on the panel. This was great. I really enjoyed it. Great conversation. Like, I think for everybody out there in finance, I think it's a great time to be in finance. I think if you really want to modernize and think of new ways, you have the tools and the sky's the limit. But I would just focus on the blocking and tackling first, build the foundation, and then you can move on from there.
Maybe I'll just chime in to follow up, and I'll make it quick, but we serve thousands of customers, but only a tiny sliver of the middle market has figured out that you can get all the way out of paper, both on the invoice and the pay side. So it's a great place to start. Huge ROI. You also get a lot of control and visibility. So that may be something to look into. Thanks for inviting me today.
Thanks again. Peter?
Yeah, I saw some questions about how do we get, as the CFO, how do I get the CEO to view us as strategic? But let me tell you the good news. All of the functional heads have this problem, and actually probably the CFO is a better place than many of the other functions to take that position. But I think you've got to demonstrate how you help drive the business forward. I think the conversation today that's been all about that is really the key, and that there are a lot of great examples. You've heard about some of them today. I think talk about those examples.
Thank you, Peter. I was going to address that in my closing as well. Jason?
I would agree with Raul. It's a fantastic time, I think, to be in finance, to be a CFO. It's awesome. I mean, right now, this last couple months, I get a nosebleed every day from going up into high level strategy and trying to deal with all the crazy uncertainty and volatility, but I cannot keep my eye off cash. I got to look at cash every single day. And so all I would do is encourage folks to continue. Like, this class is a great one. I'm constantly, I try to read a book every couple weeks. I'm constantly trying to learn about everything that's going on. And to me, to be a CFO today, it's a lifelong learning exercise, because the world's constantly changing. And so I think it's a great time, but capitalize on these resources, because there's so much moving around and you need to be on top of it.
Yeah, continue to sharpen that tool in the toolkit. It is a journey of lifelong learning. Lifelong learning is our, it's what we are driving with all our finance professionals. So really, really well said. In terms of, getting your CEO to recognize and get a seat at the table, we actually had a whole conversation around that. And what really will bring one to the table is when you demonstrate value. So find ways of demonstrating value to the business, and it'll be a pull rather than a push. The business needs you, balance sheet is back in fashion. Cash is king again. Okay, so use that power and go forth and multiply. All the very best. Thank you. Over to Jack.
Yeah, gentlemen, thank you very much. This has been fantastic. I suspect you probably do not have your chat bar open, but you are getting a written standing ovation, if there is such a thing. So people are really appreciative. This was phenomenal. I told Jennifer before we did this that IT is my personal weak point in terms of these sorts of things. I understand almost all things that CFOs do well. IT, just I'm not that great at. So for me, this was fantastic, and I suspect a lot of the members too. Thanks to everybody who attended. I always do this little game after we do the last polling question. I see if a bunch of people drop off, and almost nobody did. So that's a good sign. They were genuinely interested in the conversation. I know it's a beautiful summer Friday, and thank you for your rapt attention for this. Peter, again, I want to thank you and MIT Sloan for making this available to the members. For those who don't know, this was a free program, which is fairly phenomenal to get a series like this for free to our members. So thank you for that. And one little thing, publicly, I get way too much credit for a lot of the things that go on with the CFO Leadership Council. I'll take it. But the reality is, from our side of it, it was Jennifer Langley. She was really the brainchild of the CFO Masterclass. She really put it all together, working with Peter's team, and John Gimper too, who I don't believe is on this call. But they really deserve all the credit for what they did. I probably got more than I really did deserve, but this was fantastic. Thanks again. Hopefully we'll be in touch, and have a great kickoff of the summer, which I know starts in a week or two for most of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Great session.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks. I have one comment that I should have made way earlier. When
What's
I was looking at the screen at the end. There was diversity, but there were no women on the panel. So
Yeah, that's true. Like, I don't know if you saw the series.
yeah, I mean, overall, I think we're in good, you're in good shape, but just as an observation, that's like, I get in trouble when that happens, believe me.
Oh, I don't doubt it. Yeah, like out of the 5 panels, 3 of them were female majority. But this one happened to be all guys, right? I mean,
Yikes.
Yeah, it was one of those things. But you know what? I mean, we put together a phenomenal session, including this part, right? So it just, it just worked out that this particular section of the 5-part panel had all men. But yeah, I was acutely aware of that. So.
But no comments on being an all-male panel. So people gave you the pass on that one.
Yeah, I think so. But like I don't know. I know Peter certainly did. But Ash, if you paid attention to the first 4, like all of the CFOs were phenomenal. And, and they were like, I think just the CFOs, there were far more women. Like we had Mass General Hospital and Etsy and Amazon Studios. Absolutely fantastic. But we didn't plan it that way. We just targeted great CFOs.
Kim Dodge is just saying some of us were thinking it.
I don't doubt it. Kim probably will let me hear about it. But if you just saw this one, you'd think, hey, what's wrong with people? But we did the best we could. So.
Yeah, no, it's a great point as well about we should look at the whole series as a whole.
As opposed to this one in isolation.
Yeah, exactly. So, but you guys have fun with it?
Oh, it was great.
Good.
Great conversation. And that's what I was hoping to have, very, very free flowing.
And
challenge.
Really great interaction in the Q&A as well. I had it open.
Yeah.
That was really good.
Yeah,
we have some smart members, By the way, Ash, I hope I didn't steal your line about the pilot.
Oh, no. You always set me up. That's great. That's great.
Because a few years ago, when we didn't know each other that well at the time, you told me to introduce you that way and introduced you 3 or 4 times, and I've always used that line. So, but
no, I took out the like when Raul was saying, I want somebody right beside me in the trenches. He's talking about a co-pilot. He wants somebody right there with him, and having his CEO perspectives were really, really good. I thought the content was fantastic. Hopefully people have, gone away with actionable things to do.
Yeah, they did. The polling was interesting too. I don't know if you guys got a chance to pay attention to it, but there's definitely, some areas where, now sort of a tough time, right? You're thinking so.
It is. It really is.
Definitely some opportunities to get the
hard times. And I didn't mean to minimize that, right? Yeah.
So just in terms of looking forward, so I'm happy that this seems to have been a really great success. If I go back to that conversation we had a couple of years ago with all of you guys in a meeting room at MIT, and this is we're in a great place.
If you want me to drop off, I'm happy to do that. If you guys want to continue your discussion, I'll say goodbye.
Well, we have about 30 people who are listening anyway, so we should be careful what we say. But
27 of our closest.
It's like in the movies where there's like the after part, If you stay through the credits, you get all the good stuff. Right?
Yeah, we should do that Ferris Bueller day off thing and say, it's over, go home.
Same thing, Peter, yeah.
I just saw 26 participants still.
Somebody says they're enjoying the after party.
But so Jack and Jennifer, just sort of looking forward a little bit. I mean, I think there were some questions in the chat as well, right? About over the next few months, what else happens? What else can we do? It feels like there's still quite a long gap before November, and just even in terms of elapsed time, but also how much uncertainty there still is between now and then. So if there are, I don't want to put Diane and Court, in sort of, I guess before I've already been writing checks that they have to cash, so I have to be a bit careful on that front. But certainly would love to continue a conversation about what else we can do just to help you maintain this kind of momentum that you've got here, because that's really great to see.
I'm glad you asked, because I wanted to ask, but there's part of me that says, Jesus, the guy's done enough for me. I mean, can you keep asking people to do you a favor, right? But it was, I mean, the members are loving it. This has been the most significant undertaking, and Jennifer, if you can think of something more so. But this has just been hugely successful. I mean, 800 people signing up, and May was our most successful month we're 14 years old. That was our biggest month in history for, new members joining.
Yeah.
But even today, there were less attendance than some of the other ones, but it was still more or just about as much as we had at the conference. So when you think about it that way, it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Cool.
The need is real. The need is present. I started a series of webinars, addressing the need in terms of planning, forecasting. We had in total 18,000 over 6 runs. It's just incredible. People are hungry. People have the time, and people need this stuff. And you really are meeting a need. So well done, Jack.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, I mean, you'll never, CFOs and executives generally will never face a bigger challenge than what we're through. The hope is it's only a 6 to 18 month type of challenge. Unfortunately, it's no one on this call can really make a solid prediction on that. But it's kind of we're all educators, whatever the label is, right? It's kind of our charter to make them as successful as we can.
Yeah. Absolutely. So June was supposed to be CFO LC, right?
What's CFO LC?
The conference was June.
Oh, it was definitely May.
May. Okay.
My birthday's May 9th, so it's right around that.
Right.
The same for me on my birthday.
And MIT, the MIT Sloan conference,
that is still scheduled. We've always done it the Thursday before Thanksgiving.
Right. It's still on for them.
It's still the plan, with the acknowledgement that, that the decision may be made for us to not do it. And if it's not, 500 people in a room.
Yeah, I think that's, my suggestion would be, and it may be possible given the givens, is whether somewhere like the Boston Convention Center could provide a room big enough that you could have people sitting 6 feet apart.
By November, hopefully, we don't have the social distancing. Who knows?
Yeah, we'll have it.
Yeah, I mean, that would be very quick. And
we may have decided not to do it, but that will only be at the expense of a huge resurgence, right? So if maybe for economic reasons, society will make the decision that that's what we're going to do. But certainly, anyone from MIT is going to be unable to be in that room with 500 people because we can't bring it back to campus, right? So that's just going to I really don't think before Christmas, from the information, from the decisions I'm seeing being made, that we should have any optimism about that being different. I mean, I think maybe groups of 50 people in a big enough room is probably going to be happening. 500 is, I think, a challenge.
Well, the GOP is still going ahead with their convention.
Yeah, so we'll have the data.
Not in NC.
Right? Well, that's the experiment. If they don't have a problem 2 weeks after that, then maybe we'll think differently.
Yeah, that's a hell of an experiment, right? Yeah, I don't understand the mindset. The situation is not going to be better in 6 weeks. Whether it is in 5 months, I suppose, is debatable.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not even. It's today. There were 20,000 people in London, in the same place at the same time.
Were they outdoors?
I think that was the largest gathering in terms of the protests.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, when the protests happened, it's like, boy, these are very thoughtful protesters. 90% of them, at least when I was watching, were wearing masks. It's like, geez, these people are, they're good citizens, right? I mean, to go out and protest and do it in a way like that, that was, interesting that they would take that safety thing. Because when I first saw them starting, I'm like, oh my God, I was immediately thinking they're all going to just make each other sick.
Yeah.
Maybe they still will have. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I've been on a plane already. I've sat next to a person for 3 hours. The planes are full.
Really?
You wear masks, and there's 300 people in a plane. So, I think by November it should hopefully have, fingers crossed, second wave.
I think I went to Atlanta in September, so we'll see.
Yeah.
I exaggerated my accent for your benefit there, Jennifer. Say it with an
Yeah.
RP.
I was wondering why you were going southern.
So,
That's where I live, yeah.
yeah, but cool. Anyway, gentlemen, again, a pleasure. Good to see both of you. And
Thank you so
Peter,
much.
yeah, now that you've sort of indicated that, you know, an ability to continue, I'd love to get our teams together and brainstorm a little bit, probably virtually still at this point in time. So,
Yeah.
and
And I think you should give extra CPE credit to the 15 people who are still on the.
I'm guessing they went to the bathroom and forgot to shut down.
That's hilarious.
Some of them are writing in the chat, so some of them are actually listening.
So Peter, where's home for you?
Right now, I'm sitting in Winchester, Massachusetts,
Uh-huh.
about 5 miles north of Cambridge.
Right. But you really sound like a New Englander for sure.
I'm an old Welsher, actually. So I grew up in Aberystwyth. And I
Right.
went
Okay.
to school in Scotland at St Andrews, and I lived in London. So kind of all over the UK, but I've been appreciating the flags behind you and the fact that they're just blowing in the air conditioning as well, so that it's real. It's not kind of a picture behind you.
Yeah. I live in the US. I have a US flag, and I'm Aussie and Brit, so I have to have those two flags. So those are my three.
Citizenships?
Yeah.
You citizen of all three countries?
Exactly.
Oh, wow, good for you.
So that's me.
No, I'm just a dull, plain old one country guy. So I haven't spent enough time in any other one country. So, but my mother was Canadian and American. I don't know if that gets me anything or not.
Oh yeah, it does. Absolutely does.
Yeah, when I go up there, I make it a point because the Canadians tend to pick fights with me when I go up to there. So,
Yeah.
it's like, dude, leave me alone. I didn't elect him, okay? So I voted for the other person. Anyway, I'm going to bid you all a good weekend. I've got a 2 o'clock I got to prep for. But again, thank you. This was phenomenal. You guys can continue chatting. 17 people still eavesdropping.
Peter, thank you for your support. Jennifer and Rebecca, really well done. Everything went really well. Hats off to you guys.
Peter, I'll follow up. We'll set up a meeting.
Sounds good.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye, everybody. Have a great weekend.